Tonight's guest is Kirk Reed. Kirk, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic. It's good to be here.
Well, it's great having you. Thank you for your time. Kirk, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, 64-year-old welding engineer, was exposed to cryptids at 18 years old with a sighting of a Bigfoot, and been researching into the cryptids ever since, and have had many encounters. The deeper I dig into them, the more different types of cryptids it seems that there are, but a lot of my encounters have been with Dogman.
It's funny how that works. It's a lot like an onion. Once you start peeling back layers, you know that is. And you mentioned your occupation. For the people who are complaining about that best of episode last Friday night, I had an interview scheduled with Kirk that I was going to air last Friday, but unfortunately had a mishap at work. What happened to you, Kirk?
Well, unfortunately, I was having to take a part out of a large industrial grinder. I had an 1 15/16 wrench, which is about a little over 2 foot long. And instead of pushing the wrench to loosen a bolt, I had to pull against it. I had a lot of pressure on it. The wrench slipped off, came back, hit me in the jaw, knocked 2 of my teeth out. I actually swallowed one of them and fractured my jaw.
Oh, no. How's your recovery?
Well, I'm still sore, but it's getting better.
Well, thank goodness for that. Holy cow. All things considered, how dangerous do you think dogmen are, Kirk?
I think they get, to some extent, a bad rap. But let's face it, anything that has teeth and has claws can be a killer. Would I want to go up against one? No, not really. I've had one within 2.5 foot of me, maybe 3 foot at the most. It growled at me, but then it turned around and ran away. So it could have easily killed me right then, had it wanted to. I'm not saying that these things are something you sit around a campfire singing Kumbaya with. It's good to have a healthy respect for them, but I don't think that they are as dangerous as people make them out to be. They are not the werewolf, for the most part, that people associate with them.
I couldn't agree more with everything you said. For some reason, people listen to the show and they get this impression that I think you can sing Kumbaya with them and hang out with them and everything will be fine. I'm never going to tell an eyewitness that dogmen are safe to be around. I just bring light to the fact that when this eyewitness had an encounter where a dogman was 1 step away from them, allowed that person to leave without a scratch, this eyewitness over here had something very similar happen where the dogman had them dead to rights, terrified them, but never harmed them. I'll tell those eyewitnesses, yes, that dogman, he had you dead to rights, but he proved with his own actions that he didn't want to hurt you. And that's not to say that all dogmen are that way.
That is exactly right.
I've got no doubts there are dogmen out there that are just dangerous as all get out to be around. I'm never going to say that's not the case, but unfortunately, there are quite a few people who listen to the show that got that twisted for some reason. So, just wanted to put that out there. You put a lot of research into the Corey Godsey murder, Kirk. For the people who don't know about that case, please talk us through that and any opinions you might have on what happened.
Well, Corey Godsey was a 13-and-a-half-year-old boy down in Kentucky, just south of Hazard, Kentucky slightly. And he went into his bedroom one day to do his homework when the mother called him for dinner. Lo and behold, he wasn't there. 911 was called. 911 dispatched cars to look for him, which was a very odd thing that they would dispatch cars so easily, so quickly. But the law enforcement, the first responders, all searched for him, could not find him. The next day, they actually researched on the same area that they did, and they found him about a quarter mile behind his house, up the hill, dead, partially consumed. His stomach and his intestinal area was where the attack, shall we say, was concentrated. For lack of a better term, they defined it as canine injuries. The police chief of the town actually said that it was a pack of wild dogs. They caught 5, quote, wild dogs and had them put down right away without testing them. The one dog was a French bulldog, which was 13 pounds. There were 2 corgis, which were each about 21 to 22 pounds. There was a standard poodle that weighed almost 40 pounds. And then there was a Labrador retriever, which was a 60-pound animal. All of them are a good-natured breed, and all of them appeared to be good-natured dogs when they captured them. But yet, those are the animals that were blamed on a supposedly drug Corey up the side of this hill, a quarter mile, and I was there. I walked up the hill. Don't get me wrong, it's not an easy walk, but it would be an impossibility for all 5 of those dogs combined to drag Corey up that hill. They just would not have the strength required. And on top of that, there were no drag marks at all. It was as if something carried him up there. And as I say, he was not found the day that he disappeared. He was not found till the next day in the area that they had already searched. So where he was between the initial search and the second search when they located the body is totally beyond me. Outside of his bedroom window, and the bedroom window was open, there were large canine prints seen. When I say large, they were approximately 6 inches in diameter, which puts it out of the realm of being any domesticated dog, puts it out of the realm of being any normal wolf. So with that being said, there's pretty much only one thing that leaves a canine print that size, and that would be a Dogman.
Can you imagine what that poor kid went through? Wow.
I can't even imagine it. The fear in him had to be just astronomical, and then he was consumed alive. They determined he was still alive during the attack on his midsection and his intestines being eaten.
Horrible doesn't do it justice. Poor kid.
Yeah.
I remember when that happened and all the buzz about that when it happened, but
Sure.
It didn't take very long before the buzz died off. I wonder if it was intentionally hushed or it was natural.
Nope. I was actually, when I was down there poking into things, digging around, I was actually unofficially escorted out of the city by a police officer. I was told there was nothing there to see, nothing there to find, that they had taken care of everything, and that they don't take kindly to people nosing around. But I can tell you this, to this day, they are still picking up any dog that they deem as a stray and destroying immediately. And the reason I actually started looking into the Godsey case, I was somewhat aware of it, but a lady called me from the dog pound, and she wanted me to look into this and see if I could potentially prove that it was not stray dogs, because they were killing all these dogs unjustly. And when I found out about all the dogs that had been killed, even after those 5 dogs, that's when I decided that there had to be a lot more to it. And so I took a trip down there and spent 4.5 days.
You're not easy to deter. That's for sure, and that's admirable. You started researching cryptids in 1977 after a Bigfoot sighting you had. Recently, we recorded an episode of My Bigfoot Sighting where you talked about that sighting as well as other Bigfoot sightings you've had. On that show, Kirk talks about that first sighting as well as an encounter he had with a juvenile that grabbed him by his ankle and gave him injuries that he still suffers from present day. That episode of My Bigfoot Sighting is going to drop tonight at the same time this episode of Dogman Encounters did. If you'd like to check out that episode, please go to the description for tonight's show and you'll find a link to it. You know of 2 boys who killed a dogman in 2012, Kirk. What did they tell you about how their experience played out?
Well, they were actually out deer hunting before deer season. They were going to what we call jack a deer, which means poach a deer, simply because they were both from poor families. They were out on ATVs. One was armed with a 1100 shotgun, which is a semi-automatic. The other was armed with a 870 shotgun, which is a pump. They went at night, about 1:30 in the morning, to a field where they knew deer were known to graze. And they parked their ATVs. They got off them. They started to walk into the field because they saw eyes. They were going to sneak up on these deer and see if they couldn't get a couple. As they started to sneak up on the deer, the one decided he would use the spotlight on them. And a lot of times if you hit a deer with a spotlight, it'll just freeze and stand there for a minute. You have a very easy time getting a shot off. That's why spotlighting deer is illegal. But when he shined the spotlight on it, lo and behold, it wasn't a deer. It was about an 8.5 to 9 foot tall dogman. And it started to charge at him. When it got within about 80 yards of them, they both started firing at it. They expended a total of 13 rounds of deer slugs. They hit it 8 times before it finally was down, and it literally fell. The last 2 shots they put in it, it was less than 15 foot away from them. Now, they went back to town. They got a buddy of theirs, after some coaxing and convincing, that they actually had just killed a monster. And if he would take his 4-wheel drive truck with the winch out there and retrieve the body, they could all be millionaires. When they got out there to retrieve the body, 5 black SUVs followed them in, and they were from the government. They told them, took each one into a SUV separately, read them the riot act, told them they were going to put them in jail. They were going to put their families in jail. They were going to take their hunting rights forever. They were going to just everything you can imagine to terrorize a 17-year-old kid.
It makes you wonder what was more traumatic for them, having that 8 to 9 foot tall dogman charging them, or what followed after with the suits.
Well, quite frankly, when I talked to the other one ended up ODing, but every time I talk to the one, he brings up the black SUVs more than he does the Dogman. And as he says, it's not so much that it was traumatizing, that it absolutely made him so mad he could spit nails. That the government knows about these, the government was able to respond, and the government will not tell people about them. And as he always brings up the question, we told nobody. How did they know? And it's a valid question.
That is a valid question. A lot of people propose the idea that maybe these guys have chips in them, and when they're killed, maybe somehow a signal is sent out. It does make you wonder.
And I've thought the same thing at times. I mean, I'm not sure. But I can tell you also that dogmen have been around for thousands of years. So they're not anything new. So I would have to assume, or guess, shall we say, that the ones that have chips in them, of course, are ones that our government has altered or possibly even raised. And then there's always the dogmen that you find out in the wilderness, shall we call it, that is just a normal dogman. Now, which one of the two is the most dangerous? I don't know.
You raise some really good points. It cracks me up when people pose the idea that dogmen are just something that's been created in a test tube, and that explains the whole phenomenon. But like you said, they've been around so much longer than we've had the technology to come close to genetically splice DNA and do what would be required to actually produce a dogman in a laboratory. So, yeah, I think there are two different directions we're talking about here. You've got the dogmen that have been around the whole time, and then you probably do have some that are straight out of a test tube.
Yep. And that's truthfully exactly what I believe. The very sad fact is, when you do see one, you don't know which it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. In 1982, you heard about the werewolf of London, Ohio, Kirk. How'd you hear about it, and what can you tell us about it?
Okay, the werewolf of London, Ohio was said to be a werewolf that was stalking the local area. London, Ohio is kind of southwestern Ohio, somewhere down around Dayton. Anyways, I had heard about it because the quote werewolf, who they said was the werewolf, actually died, and then the werewolf disappeared after this man died. Well, I was at that point in time still trying to wrap my head around the Bigfoot thing, and I actually had read an article, just a small article, in I want to say the Cleveland Press or Cleveland Plain Dealer, one of those two papers. And I figured, I'm going to go down there and talk to the people, see if what I saw matches what they saw. I don't think this was a werewolf I saw, but maybe it is. So that was in the late fall that I encountered that newspaper article. Then in the spring of '83 is when I went down there, and I talked to people. Some people did not want to talk. Some people said that they didn't believe it. I did get to talk to half a dozen people that actually had seen it, and I had talked to the owner of the gas station that the guy worked at that they blamed for being the werewolf. All the owner of the gas station could say was, well, the man showed up one day wanting a job. I had an opening, so I hired him. That he really didn't like to be around any people, and that we do enough business with tires, tire repairs and such, that I was able to keep him back in the mechanic shop just fixing tires and such. I didn't have to pay him a lot, don't know where he lived. He would walk to work, he'd be here when we got here, and he would walk home. We've offered him rides, he would never accept them. And everybody that I talked to that actually saw the werewolf in the werewolf form, there was no doubt it was a Dogman. Was not what I had seen that, like I said, I ended up finding out was Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. So that was the start of the second cryptid now I had to research. And, it's hard enough researching one, trying to concentrate on it. Now you've got your interest peaked on a second one, and you can't let go of the first one. So now you spend twice as much time doing it. Yeah, it's, shall we say, addictive maybe. You want that knowledge. But the house that George, the werewolf, lived in, and I'm going to call him George because I really don't remember his name, but the house that he lived in had one room in it that was actually lined with 5/8 thick steel plate, the entire room. Now, the police, when they went to do a, shall we call it, well-being check on this man because he had not shown up for work for a few days, and they had an idea where he lived, when they found the house and went in, and they found him in there, they also found the room. There were scratches, deep scratches, in that solid steel plate that could not, quote, be made by any animal. So it seems like somebody was actually helping this man and was trying to control him when he would change into the werewolf. They seem to have been locking him in this room, and the scratches were made by him trying to get out of the room. But nobody ever knew who the helper was, although I did get a very good description of a red-haired lady. Never could find her for sure, but... And of course, when he died, she disappeared.
Thank goodness for that room, huh? It does make you wonder if there are ever any nights when maybe he was out when he transformed. Hope that's not the case, but you never know.
Well, without a doubt, there's nights that he was out. He was actually tracked back to this house by a neighbor that lived about 1.5 miles away, that he would, as a werewolf, be over basically terrorizing him. And they tracked his tracks right back to this house. And that actually was how the police knew where this house was to go do the well-being check.
That's right. Yeah, the couple's names were Keith and Diane, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I believe you do.
Can you imagine how bad it would be to have a werewolf lurking around your property like that? Dogmen are bad enough, but to actually have a bona fide werewolf, that's not good.
Yeah, exactly.
If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know. All right, Kirk, please tell us about your own encounters now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, my very first Dogman encounter. I had got a new 2008 Jeep Liberty. Was exactly perfect what I wanted. I took it over right after picking it up and went over to my buddy's house to show him. As I'm over there, he has a very long driveway. It's about 100 yards long. It is only 1 lane wide. There is no place to turn around. So if you pull in the driveway, you have to back out. As you're backing out, there are woods to the left of you and a big open field to the right of you. So after I got done showing off my new ride, I was backing out, and in the trees I kind of catch a glimpse of something moving. Didn't think anything of it, thought it was a deer. We have plenty of deer here in Pennsylvania. So I continued backing out. As I get to the end of the driveway, I cut my wheels to go out onto the road, stop, start to throw the car in drive, and lightning quick, this thing comes and literally jumped across the hood of that Jeep, landed right beside the driver's door of it. I'm sitting there with the window down. Its face is looking in at me about 2.5, maybe 3 foot away. It kind of growls and shows its teeth. And I'm just absolutely frozen. I'm not knowing what to do, The smart thing to do would have been throw it in drive and stomp on the throttle, but at that point in time, I'm not even knowing what to do. Like I say, it shows its teeth, kind of growls, turns, takes 2 steps. The first step was across the road onto the embankment. The second step was up the embankment to the top of it, and then it just jumped and it was back into the woods. And there I am, still just sitting there trying to figure out what just happened. How do you process something like that? So that was my absolute first face-to-face with a Dogman. So now, after the Sasquatch, after finding out about the werewolf of London, Ohio, now after seeing a Dogman for myself in person, so close I could have reached out and touched him. I could feel his breath against me. I will never forget the smell of his breath, but that's regardless. So now that just gives me more I've got to search, more I've got to look into, start really going out, doing research. Over the years, I've had several different partners that were research partners with me. The second encounter happened down in Braxton County, West Virginia. As me and the guy that was with me, we were walking into this one holler, and literally we heard a growl. And when I say a growl, it sounded exactly like a dog, only like through a megaphone, amplified 100 times. I mean, the lung power on it had to be astronomical. That one we were in a way fortunate because we didn't have an encounter as per se, other than the growl. And that was a very good thing, because as nasty as the growl sounded, I probably would not have wanted to run into that one. Moving forward, I was at a location about 30 miles from my house in slightly northern Pennsylvania. Was out there scouting for deer hunting areas. Had permission from the property owner. I was walking down this one trail. Up in front of me, about 75 foot, there lays a gray wolf, I'm thinking. And I mean, very large gray wolf, which shouldn't be here in Pennsylvania. So, of course, I froze in my tracks, and I was unarmed, had a knife on me. That was about it, because it wasn't hunting season yet or anything. And I was not expecting anything to be out there. So I figure, okay, I'm just going to back away slowly. I don't want to do the flight thing and then become prey. So I start to back away, and this thing gets up on all fours like a normal wolf, like it's going to, I'm thinking maybe it's going to come at me, or maybe I'm going to be lucky and it's going to head the other way. Well, then from 4 legs, it stands up to 2. Turns, and thank God it walked away from me instead of at me. And there again, as soon as it started walking away, I started running. There is no valor when there's no reason to try to challenge one. If you can get away from it, you're best off. Now, probably one of the scariest ones, and not just for me, but for the Dogman also, just happened a couple years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Me and a very good friend, Hank, he was a researcher with me, actually helped found Northeast Cryptid Investigations. We were down at one of our standard investigating areas. It was a cool, rainy day. Not much was going on, so we had brought our 4-wheelers with us, and we decided we'd go out for a little ride. Well, Hank does like to drink beer, and that's not a good thing usually, riding a 4-wheeler and drinking beer, but he was. Well, when we get back to camp, it's approximately 9:30, 10 o'clock, maybe a little later. The fires went out. So we had brought 2 5-gallon cans of gasoline for the 4-wheelers and a 5-gallon can of diesel fuel to use to start the fires with. Well, as I say, Hank had a few too many beers, I guess, and instead of grabbing the can of diesel fuel, he grabbed a gas can and poured about 3 gallons of gasoline on what was going to become the fire, and then lit it. Well, it blew up. We had flames shooting 30, 35 foot in the air. There was a very large clump of weeds just off to the, what would have been my left, his right, but there was the large clump of weeds. When this fire blew up, a dogman jumped up on two legs that was hiding behind this clump of weeds and took off running, snapping 4-inch diameter branches off of the trees as it ran up the hillside through the woods. We really did not want to follow it because it was dark, didn't follow it as per se. We went up, looked a little bit, says, okay, it's gone. We didn't get any sleep that night to speak of, even though we took turns, each one staying awake to be on guard and let the other one sleep. Still, when it was your turn to sleep, you didn't sleep. In the morning, when it was daylight, then we actually went and saw what kind of damage it was able to do. And the one that sticks out in my mind the most is the fact there was a black walnut tree that had a 4-inch diameter branch at about 6.5 foot off the ground. And this thing snapped that off like it was a twig when it ran through. The amount of power it would have taken to snap a 4-inch branch off a black walnut, it's unfathomable that a human could do it. And like I said, we both saw clear as day that this was no human. This was a dog man. It was probably 7.5 to 8 foot tall. I have had maybe 4 or 5 others, but they've just been, shall we say, minor sightings where I'll be out in the woods and you can hear something and you just catch a glimpse of it, that it's trailing you, but you really don't have an encounter. The other real good encounter was I had a guest researcher out of Ohio down a couple years ago who thought she wanted to see a dog man, thought she was ready to see a dog man. She was on the back of my 4-wheeler. We were going to get cigarettes because her and her fiance hadn't brought any cigarettes, even though they smoke. So there was a very old barn right beside the trail we were going down. The door was not what you would call open, not really off. The door was kind of hanging. It was one of those sliding doors, and it was kind of hanging. One hinge was on, one hinge was off, to where the door would only maybe open about 7 or 8 foot instead of the probably 15 foot that it did. And because of the type of trail it was and where we were only going maybe 15 mile an hour. I'm the type that I'm always looking around. I keep my head on a swivel, shall we say, as I am out and about, because you never know what you're going to see. And this guest researcher, she was doing the same. As we come up to this barn, lo and behold, this barn's only 15 foot from the edge of the trail. And there is a big black dog man ready to pounce on us because we were on the 4-wheeler. I hit the gas as hard as it would go. We got out of there. That was fortunate. That, like I say, it was ready to pounce. and I was not ready to be dinner. But I believe that might have been what it had in mind. And there again, it may have been a bluff charge, but it did come out after us. Like I say, I hit the throttle on that four-wheeler just as hard as I could. And we actually got up to about 62 mile an hour getting away from it. And until we were above about 40 mile an hour, it was still catching us.
If that isn't a brown shorts moment, I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for the guest researcher, it was definitely a wet shorts moment.
Oh, no, I believe it. And rightfully so.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that particular one, I can't say it wasn't a bluff charge, but, we were already by it. It would have had no reason to do a bluff charge to us. That's why I don't believe it had any good intentions.
In my opinion, if it really wanted you, it could have very easily allowed you to go past, and then it could have come up behind you, where you never would have had a chance to make a run for it in the first place, but that's just my opinion.
Right. And that's the possibility, too. We'll never know that one way or another for sure.
That's a good point. When that Dogman Luke duked it across the hood of your Liberty, did it cause any damage?
No, it cleared the hood completely. I mean, literally, do you remember that old show, The $6 Million Man?
Oh yeah, I used to watch it all the time.
Okay, well, the way it jumped was almost the way the $6 Million Man jumped. I mean, it just massive leg strength. And it cleared the top of the hood of the Jeep by probably a good 2.5 foot easily. And surprisingly, the way it landed, it was not awkward. It did not stumble when it landed. Its feet were perfectly, just, I guess you'd say, a perfect landing.
How tall would you say that one was?
That was good 7.5 foot. At times looking back, I question, was it really that big? And then at times I stop and think, well, when it turned and bounded away, it stood up, and literally the Jeep is pretty tall, and basically from the armpits up was above the roof of the Jeep.
So it probably was about 7.5 feet tall then.
Oh yeah.
What more can you tell us about its appearance?
Its appearance, it was a very dark brown, not solid colored, shall we say. It had some splotchiness to it, where it almost looked like the fur was thinner in some areas than other, almost as if you could see skin through the fur, like maybe it had mange or something, or like it had been fighting with something and lost some fur. Arms were very long. It had not really hands, but hands kind of like a raccoon's. Its hair, it stunk. Let me put it to you like that. Its hair in some spots were matted, and some spots were not matted. Like it really could have used a good trip to a dog groomer, shall we say. It had pretty big upper body. Its waist was narrow for the size of its shoulders. Its legs were bent, what we call a backwards bend, like a dog's leg is. And, it was puzzling.
Oh, I'm sure it was. What did you notice about its teeth, though?
There were lots of them. They seemed to be very large, and they were very pointy. Not like a dog's teeth. A dog has basically the two canines, top and bottom. Well, this had 4 upper canines. And to me, that was, shall we say, just that much more scary, because that takes it kind of out of being, well, let's just say you don't know what it is. But on the other hand, looking back at it and thinking about other things, its teeth very much did mimic what a coyote's teeth are like, only a whole lot larger.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a sight you're never going to forget. Do you think all dogmen are flesh and blood creatures, or do you think some might be supernatural beings?
I think all dogmen are flesh and blood creatures. Now, with that being said, I'm not going to say that a dogman and a werewolf are the same thing, because I don't think they are. And an actual werewolf, I believe, is a shapeshifter. The Native Americans believe that. And because of the fact I am part Native American, I have to go along with their beliefs, for the simple fact that they've dealt with these things for thousands of years.
Native Americans know so much more about dogmen, Sasquatch, you name it, than we're ever going to know, so they've forgotten more than we're ever going to know about them.
Oh, exactly right.
Do you think dogmen are responsible for most of the missing person cases, Kirk?
I wouldn't say most of them. I would say dogmen account for a portion of them. I believe Sasquatch accounts for a portion of them. And there's other things out there that we've seen that I don't even know what they are. And I would have to assume they account for a portion. And there again, on some of the missing persons cases, I believe that they may be criminal activity and that the police just haven't found the bodies. I don't think you can lump anyone into any one category. It's a combination of all.
You know about something in the woods you say is worse to encounter than a dogman or Sasquatch. Please expand on that for us.
Feral humans. The most dangerous creature in the woods is a human. We have in the Appalachian Mountains, which I live in the Appalachian Mountains. We have feral people. There are feral people on the West Coast in the mountains. There are feral people pretty well anywhere that they can be, that they can survive and survive undetected, including in the White Mountains up in New York and such. What makes a feral person so dangerous is their mind. They are able to think like a human because they are a human. We don't know how Dogman thinks. We don't know how Bigfoot thinks. We know how a human thinks. And the one particular run-in that I know that you're referencing, when the 5 of them were standing outside the shelter, talking back and forth amongst themselves in what appeared to be their own language, was an undistinguishable language. Like they were trying to decide who gets what piece to eat when they kill them. But fortunately, they do understand what a gun is. And Well, let's just say sometimes you make it out and you're glad that you did and you never want to go back. And when you report the encounter to the police, they really don't even care. Because I'm sure it wasn't the first report.
Imagine being that guy. That's a bad spot to find yourself in. If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to dogmanencounters.com/podcast. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Kirk, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share, including promoting your show, Abnormal Investigations?
Yes, I'm the co-host of Abnormal Investigations. Come join us, listen to our shows. You will be educated and you will be entertained. And I will go ahead and let you in on a show that is going to drop on the 28th of October. We will actually have a professional vampire hunter on. A man that makes his living hunting vampires and travels the world wide.
Imagine the things that he's experienced and seen. I can only imagine.
Yeah. Tomorrow we will do a short show somewhat on vampires, and that's just to get the people primed up a little bit. And then in September we'll do one more short show on vampires. And then, as I say, this professional vampire hunter comes on October 28th in time for Halloween. And he actually right now is in South America on a vampire hunt for 6 weeks.
He doesn't frighten easily, does he?
No, not at all.
No, I'd say he doesn't. Well, Kirk, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the details of your experiences as well as the others that you told us about tonight. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. You are welcome. Well, thanks again so much for your time and have a great night.